Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Tim Tebow's book, Shaken: Discovering Your True Identity in the Midst of Life's Storms. This dive is really all about exploring, how to navigate life's inevitable challenges, and find a steady sense of self no matter what's changing around you. Now, before we jump right in, it's probably important to note that Tebow's book, it draws pretty heavily on his personal Christian faith and biblical principles. That's sort of the lens he uses to discuss these themes: identity, resilience. Our goal here, though, is to unpack the powerful ideas in the book itself, explore their broader relevance for, well, anyone facing life's uncertainties while, staying neutral on specific religious viewpoints.
Right. And what's compelling, I think, is how the source material uses the author's own very, very public journey, triumphs, the setbacks, and uses that to explore these really universal questions about identity and resilience and purpose. We'll look at everything from, the athletic highs, winning the Heisman, to some major career shifts, and how those moments, at least as he presents them, can reveal these deeper truths about who we are.
Yeah, and the book clearly resonated with a lot of people. Figures like singer-songwriter John Bon Jovi, he described Tebow as a role model, an inspiration to those who have a dream and are willing to accept life as a journey full of ups and downs. That's a direct quote. And Pastor Mark Batterson, he's quoted in the book, highlighting how it shows how God is faithful even when our entire lives feel shaken to the core. Ravi Zacharias also praised his ability to combine strength and boldness with kindness and compassion.
So connecting this to our sort of mission for today, we're exploring how people can maintain a strong sense of self, a purpose, even when everything externally just shifts dramatically. And the author introduces this really profound concept that true identity, in his view anyway, it doesn't come from what you achieve or what you have, but from whose you believe you are. It's about a spiritual connection that kind of transcends worldly definitions. So yeah, get ready for some deeply personal stories and some pretty thought-provoking insights here.
Okay, so where does this whole exploration of identity really begin in the book? He opens with a pretty powerful premise. His identity wasn't actually found in the Heisman, the playoff run, nor was it in the lows, like getting cut from a team. He reflects on how the world just constantly tries to define us by our circumstances or, what we achieve.
And this really prompts us, and you listening, to consider, who are you when life seems great? Money's good, home life's peaceful. And then who are you when your world just feels completely shaken? Finances are tight, relationships are maybe rocky. The book directly challenges that temptation, that really common temptation, to define our worth by these external things: money, looks, applause.
He tells this really vivid story about staring at a text message from Coach Belichick. It just said, "Timmy, will you please come in?" And that immediate stomach drop he describes, that sudden shattering of, perceived security. It powerfully illustrates the book's core argument, doesn't it? Our sense of identity is so often tied up in these external things, which makes us really vulnerable when those things inevitably shift.
Yeah, exactly. And a key aspect that comes through is his raw honesty about feeling, well, betrayed, especially after the trade from the Broncos to the Jets in 2012 and then being let go just a year later. He talks about his mind just being bombarded with questions like, why wasn't I enough? Should I have trained differently?
Yeah.
You can tell that pattern of being cut, it clearly deeply impacted him.
It really is compelling how he describes turning to prayer in those moments, thinking, I thought this was going somewhere special. I thought this was a plan you designed for me. He's asking God, if that was true, then why is this thing crashing and burning?
Yeah.
It feels like a very human, very relatable struggle with disappointment and questioning, what's the purpose here?
And yet, he made this conscious choice. He writes about deciding not to quit or gripe or pout. He decided basically not to let other people define him. And this meant putting in some serious hard work, like with the pitching coach Tom House. Even if that effort didn't immediately pay off, or, if he didn't ultimately make it as an NFL quarterback, his commitment at that point was just to outwork everyone else.
Right. And he shares that really funny, very human story about his friend Brian picking him up right after he's been released. And Miley Cyrus's Party in the USA is just blasting from the car stereo. He describes laughing out loud at how absurd it all felt, despite, the huge pressure, the media storm that was already brewing outside, thousands of critical comments pouring in.
And digging into that period a bit more, the challenge of living in New York. Paparazzi, media literally camped outside his duplex. He even mentions them sifting through his trash. It just highlights the immense pressure he was under and that accidental brush-off of Alicia Keys at the Met Gala because he was distracted talking to, quote, a really pretty girl. It's another funny, kind of relatable detail. It shows just how surreal his public life was then. He does admit in the book, though, to isolating himself, feeling pretty lonely during that time, and realizing later just how critical it is to lean into a supportive community.
So moving on from his own personal journey, the book then kind of broadens its scope, right? It introduces us to other people whose identities were shaken, but who, as he illustrates it, found a path forward. Like Mark Stewart, the former lead singer of Audio Adrenaline. I mean, this guy had 2 Grammys, 17 #1 hits, then diagnosed with spasmodic dysphonia in 2004. It's this incurable voice disorder, affects the voice box, makes it spasm. He had to step down in 2006.
Yeah, and what's remarkable there is despite feeling numb, isolated from his music career, Mark, as the book tells it, just devoted his life to caring for the helpless. Through the Hands and Feet ministry he co-founded, he even works with the Haitian government, trying to help rewrite their cultural narrative, create jobs. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was looking for, well, profound hope for other people.
Then there's Chelsea, a young woman battling cancer. And despite a really grim prognosis, her quiet confidence, her faith, it was just unwavering. Her favorite verse, he mentions, was Psalm 27.1. That's a passage often cited about trusting in, divine light and salvation in dark times. And she was constantly telling everyone, God's got this.
Yeah.
The author actually shares how Chelsea, through her resilience, was the one encouraging him.
Wow. That really makes you think. And what can we learn about perseverance from Jacob's story? He lost his leg because of compartment syndrome after a football injury. That's where pressure builds up dangerously in the muscles. Doctors apparently borderline laughed when he said he wanted to play again. But he earned a walk-on spot at the University of Virginia. He said, "There is nothing sweeter than proving doubters and critics wrong." I mean, that's just a powerful testament to defying expectations.
Absolutely. And then there's Gary Albers. He endured this incredibly dark, abusive childhood, and he struggled with anger, with nightmares, even after becoming a Christian. But through, as the book puts it, surrendering to his faith, he found freedom, found peace, eventually getting to a point where he felt no desire to, quote, punch the living daylights out of anybody. His journey is tied to themes you find in Psalm 40 about restoration.
Garrett Leopold's story is also just incredibly poignant. Born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, it's a severe defect. The left side of the heart is underdeveloped. He needed multiple heart transplants, one when he was just 12 weeks old. And the source highlights this heartbreaking connection with his donor, an 18-year-old named Amanda Pierce. But despite all his health challenges, Garrett showed this incredible generosity, donating his allowance just $27 to the author's foundation. And that small act apparently inspired this huge wave of donations from much wealthier supporters.
These stories, they're all so different, but they collectively underscore this powerful truth, don't they? That true resilience often comes not from, avoiding life's shakes, but from finding new purpose or meaning within them. They show how people, whether through service or quiet faith or just sheer determination, can rediscover that inner strength. So building on these examples, the author then really emphasizes the importance of having a circle of trust. Leaning on family, close friends. He recalls immediately calling his brother Robbie or his friend Eric right after being cut. And that contrasts so sharply with his later loneliness as a jet, where he thought he could just white-knuckle life on his own.
Yeah, and Brett's story fits perfectly here. He had this childhood filled with violence, abuse, which led him to become deeply self-reliant.
Yeah.
But then a cancer diagnosis, stage 4 melanoma, it just forced him to realize he couldn't actually do life alone. He learned, as he describes it, to lean on his community, his brothers and sisters in Christ, who supported him through prayer and helped him see the blessings that maybe God had shown him all along, but he hadn't recognized.
The deep dive also gets into these voices of negativity, both, the external critics, but also the ones inside our own heads. The author notes, sometimes we are our own worst enemy, which is pretty relatable. He shares how he personally had to battle self-doubt, wondering, was he still the Heisman winner? Or was he just the person who has been told over and over by so-called analysts that I can't throw?
And this raises a really important discussion about how we internalize criticism, doesn't it? The book suggests that when your self-worth starts crumbling because of all that external pressure, the remedy, as the author sees it, is to remember whose we are. That's his phrase. And to stop comparing ourselves to others. Instead, the focus should shift to personal improvement, kind of embodying that principle that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work as hard.
So moving beyond those internal struggles, the book then explores more active strategies for actually confronting challenges. It frames fear as a kind of self-imposed prison, and he recounts that incredible 2011 Broncos game against the Dolphins. They came back from 15 points down with just over 5 minutes left, won in overtime. It's just a powerful example of not giving up, right? Even when the odds seem completely stacked against you.
Right. And connecting that to maybe a broader perspective, he uses the story of David and Goliath as an analogy. Yeah, a teenager described as a red-haired runt facing this giant, not with the standard armor, but with, quote, what I always use, my sling and my staff.
Mhm.
And that analogy really emphasizes using your unique strengths, your resources, however humble they might seem, to face these overwhelming challenges.
And this connects directly to what he calls his John 3.16 phenomenon. It's quite something. It refers to what he sees as this series of remarkable coincidences, all centering around that specific biblical verse, John 3.16. You know, the one about God's love. It started with him just personally deciding to wear the scripture reference on his eye black in college. But then he recounts how it seemed to miraculously align with game stats later in the NFL, like 316 passing yards, 31.6 yards per completion, 31 minutes, 6 seconds time of possession, and even audience numbers, 31.6 million ratings, 90 million Google searches for the verse, all during one playoff game. And it happened exactly 3 years to the day after he first wore it. He describes the PR guy flagging him down, just astonished by all these numbers lining up.
It's certainly a striking story. And it raises that question. How can seemingly ordinary actions sometimes have this extraordinary impact? The book describes another instance, a young man who bravely got on one knee to pray for a stranger, right there in public, an act he worried might make him look like a weirdo, but it deeply impacted the person he prayed for. It's really a challenge to us, isn't it? To step outside our comfort zones, do something different, even if it feels a bit scary or unconventional.
Yeah, and the author shares a personal regret related to this. Seeing a man whose car had broken down on the highway, but being advised not to stop because of all the media attention he attracted. He says now he should have just followed his gut and helped the guy. He laments in the book, "What's the matter with people? This was a great opportunity for people to get off their phones and take a stand." It really illustrates his belief in the power of simple, direct, compassionate action.
Exactly. And it emphasizes the idea, as the source suggests, that taking a stand doesn't always require a ton of work, effort, or strategy. Often, it just needs a willingness to, quote, find a need and fill it. It highlights the impact of just being proactively compassionate.
And he gives some really compelling examples of this in action, like the Night to Shine event. It's now this worldwide prom specifically for people with special needs. And that inspiring story of Boomer, the 7-year-old boy with cerebral palsy and also schizencephaly. That's a rare brain disorder. He first donated that $27 from his allowance, and then later he went on to raise over $9,000 for the foundation. It just shows how these small acts of generosity can genuinely ignite massive collective action.
And another powerful example is Robin's story, a young woman with cerebral palsy. A classmate apparently made fun of her walker, and she initially saw it as just a magnet that attracted stares. But later, as the book describes, she learned to embrace it as a platform to impact others. Much like the author talks about learning to use his own dyslexia, not as a hindrance, but maybe even as a strength in some ways. It's about, living in the uniqueness you were created with and being motivated to maybe go against the grain, against conventional expectations.
So, as we kind of reflect on all these different stories, the book brings us back to the idea that human role models, well, including the author himself, are flawed. He shares this story from 3rd grade where his arrogance about his baseball skills really disappointed his sisters, and it led to this family rule about memorizing verses, about humility. It really highlights the human side of people we might admire.
Yeah, and it prompts that question. Why do we so often put people on pedestals? The source is pretty clear in asserting that we're all imperfect. It uses the term sinners who miss the mark. And it recounts the author's really powerful experience visiting a prison in the Philippines, sharing a message of hope there, and having this realization like, I am just as messed up and need Jesus just as badly as everyone else. It really underscores this universal need for grace.
Right. And he stresses that we shouldn't be quick to judge others or, fall for the seemingly perfect lives people curate on social media. Instead, he suggests looking towards his specific faith as the only perfect, unchanging constant, extending grace to other people, just as he believes it's been given to us.
And connecting this maybe to the bigger picture, the source does touch on that age-old question, why do bad things happen? It acknowledges that doubt is normal. And in the author's view, God isn't scared off by our questions. Ultimately, though, it emphasizes that, from his perspective, God's plan and wisdom are just larger than our own understanding. Quoting a sentiment often paraphrased from Scripture, what people planned for evil, God planned for good.
He recounts one last powerful story about visiting inmates who were on suicide watch. He felt completely drained, didn't really want to go, but felt prompted, as he describes it, by God to go anyway. And one man confessed that just moments before they arrived, he had prayed for God to show him if he was real. 5 minutes later, Tebow and his group walked in. It shows how, from the author's viewpoint, a divine purpose can work through us, even when we're tired or maybe don't feel up to the task. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it seems pretty clear that the message in Shaken isn't really about avoiding the storms of life. That's impossible, right? It's much more about how we navigate them, and maybe even more importantly, how we allow those storms to shape us, to redefine us. It's really about finding an anchor when everything around you feels completely unsteady.
And this leaves us with, I think, a compelling thought for you, our listener. The author mentions that biblical story, the feeding of the 5,000, where a young boy offers just 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And one of the disciples just dismisses it, right? Saying, what good is that with this huge crowd? And yet, in the story, that small offering was multiplied beyond measure. So the question for you is, what small 5 loaves and 2 fish, maybe some seemingly insignificant resource or talent or just an act of kindness, what have you been holding back? Perhaps fearing it's just not enough. What might be transformed for a far greater purpose in your own life or maybe the lives of those around you?